Richard Halston thought he had it all: wealth, success, and power. But a chance encounter with his ex-wife and the son he never knew he had shattered his world. Can they rebuild the family he abandoned 23 years ago? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Richard Halston stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse office, adjusting his expensive silk tie. At 48 years old, he had everything money could buy: the finest suits, a fleet of luxury cars, and a view of the city that reminded him daily of how far he'd come. But tonight, his perfectly organized world was about to be turned upside down. "Mr. Halston, your reservation at La Maison is confirmed for 8 p.m. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Thank you, Sarah," he replied, grabbing his jacket. Another dinner alone, but that's how he liked it, or at least that's what he told himself. The restaurant was packed with New York's elite, exactly the crowd Richard now belonged to. The maitre led him to his usual table, the one with the best view of the dining room. As he settled in with the wine list, something caught his eye. A laugh. A familiar laugh he hadn't heard in 23 years. There she was. Angela, his college sweetheart, his first love, his ex-wife. Richard's hands tightened around the menu. She looked even more beautiful than he remembered, her dark skin glowing. Under the restaurant's soft lights, her smile just as bright as it had been in college. But it wasn't Angela that made his heart stop. It was the young man sitting next to her. The boy, no, the young man, couldn't have been more than 22. He had Richard's green eyes, Richard's jawline. Even the way he gestured while talking was familiar, like looking in a mirror from the past. "Would you like to order, sir?" the waiter asked. Richard barely heard him. His mind was racing back to that day, 23 years ago, when he walked out on Angela. They were struggling to make ends meet, and he had big dreams. Too big, he thought, to be tied down to a marriage that was holding him back. So he left, convinced he was doing them both a favor. He never knew she was pregnant. Before he could stop himself, Richard was on his feet, walking toward their table. His legs felt heavy, each step bringing him closer to a past he thought he'd buried under layers of success and wealth. Angela saw him first. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of shock, then something harder. The young man noticed her expression and turned to see what had caused it. "Angela," Richard said, his voice barely steady. It's been a long time." Angela sat up straighter, her hand instinctively moving closer to her son's. "Richard, I didn't expect to see you here." The young man looked between them, confusion clear on his face. "Mom, who is this?" That word, "Mom," hit Richard like a physical blow. He stared at the young man, unable to look away from those familiar green eyes. "Who is this?" Richard asked, even though deep down he already knew the answer. Angela's voice was calm but firm. "This is Marcus, my son." She paused, looking Richard straight in the eyes. "Our son." The restaurant seemed to spin around Richard. He gripped the back of an empty chair to steady himself. "Our... Why didn't you tell me?" Angela's laugh was bitter. "Tell you? You disappeared, Richard. Changed your number. Moved away. You made it pretty clear you didn't want to be found." Marcus stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Wait, this is him? This is my father." The word father echoed in Richard's ears, a title he'd never known he had. A responsibility he'd run from without even knowing it existed. "I think you should leave," Angela said quietly. "This is neither the time nor the place." But Marcus stepped forward. "No, Mum. I want to hear what he has to say." He turned to Richard, his green eyes blazing with 22 years of questions. "Why did you leave?" Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. How could he explain to this young man, his son, that he'd been a coward, that he'd chosen money and success over love and family? I made a mistake," he finally managed to say. "A mistake?" Marcus's voice rose slightly. "Is that what you call abandoning your wife? Your unborn child?" Several diners had turned to watch the scene unfolding. Angela stood up, placing a gentle hand on Marcus's arm. "Not here, honey, let's go." As they gathered their things, Richard found his voice again. Please, can we talk? Maybe tomorrow. I want to explain. Angela looked at him for a long moment. That's not my decision anymore. She turned to Marcus. It's up to you. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened his contacts, and handed it to Richard. His voice was cold but controlled. Put your number in. I'll think about it. Richard's hands shook as he typed in his number. When he handed the phone back, his fingers brushed against Marcus's, and he felt a jolt of connection, of shared blood, of lost time. As they walked away, Richard remained rooted to the spot, watching. His son lead Angela through the restaurant. Just before they reached the door, Marcus looked back, his expression a mix of anger and curiosity. Richard returned to his table, but the wine list lay forgotten. His perfectly ordered world had just been shattered, and for the first time in 23 years, his wealth meant nothing. He had a son who had grown up without him, who looked at him with his own eyes but saw a stranger. The waiter approached again. Sir, are you ready to order? Richard shook his head and stood up. No, I'm not ready at all. Angela's hands shook as she tried to unlock her front door. Behind her, Marcus paced on the porch, his footsteps heavy with anger and confusion. 22 years, Marcus said. 22 years, and he just shows up like that. Finally getting the door open, Angela stepped into their home, the home she'd built for them with years of hard work. Family photos lined the walls, telling the story of their life together. Marcus's first day of school, his high school graduation, all the moments Richard had missed. Sit down, honey, Angela said, patting the couch. We need to talk. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his father's it made Angela's heart ache. Why didn't you tell me more about him? All these years, whenever I asked, you just said he left, that's it. Just he left. Because that's what happened, Angela replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. He walked out one day, said he needed more from life than what we had. Next thing I knew, he was gone, phone disconnected, no forwarding address. But you knew he was successful now, right? I mean, everyone knows about Richard Halston. He's in the news all the time with his real estate empire. Angela nodded slowly. I saw him in the papers, yes, watched him build his fortune from afar. But by then we had our own life. You were thriving. We didn't need his money. Meanwhile, across town, Richard sat in his dark office, a glass of scotch untouched on his desk. He'd been staring at his phone for hours, willing it to ring. The city lights twinkled below, but they seemed to mock him now. All his success, all his wealth, and he'd never known he had a son. His assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Halston, it's nearly midnight. Should I call your driver? No, Sarah, just go home. Richard opened his computer and typed Marcus into the search bar. He had to know more. Social media revealed pieces of the life he'd missed. Marcus at college basketball games, Marcus volunteering at youth centers, Marcus graduating with honors. Each photo was a knife in Richard's heart. Back at Angela's house, Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at the new contact. Richard Halston. He looked shocked, Marcus said quietly. Like he really didn't know about me. Angela sighed deeply. He didn't. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after he left. By then, he was already gone. But why didn't you try to find him? Tell him? Marcus, look at me. Angela took her son's hands in hers. When your father left, I was broken. But then I found out about you, and suddenly I had purpose again. I went back to school, started my business, gave you everything I could. I wasn't going to beg a man who walked away from us to come back. Marcus pulled away and walked to the wall of photos. I'm going to call him. Tonight? No, but soon. I need answers. In his office, Richard finally picked up his scotch. His reflection in the window looked older, tired. He pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photo he'd kept hidden for 23 years. Him and Angela on their wedding day. They were so young, so in love. He'd convinced himself leaving was the right thing to do. Now, looking at that photo, he saw nothing but a coward. His phone buzzed. A text message. Coffee. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the Daily Grind on 7th. Marcus. Richard's hands trembled as he typed back, I'll be there. At that same moment, Marcus showed his mother the exchange. Angela touched his shoulder gently. "Are you sure about this?" "No," Marcus admitted. "But I've spent my whole life wondering. Now I can finally get some answers." Angela watched her son head upstairs to bed. She picked up a photo from the coffee table. Marcus at his college graduation, his arm around her shoulders, both of them beaming. They'd made such a good life together. Now Richard was back, threatening to disrupt everything. She pulled out her own phone and made a call. "Lisa, it's Angela. Remember how you always say I can use your law office after hours? I need to come by tonight. There are some documents I need to review." As midnight approached, 3 people lay awake in different parts of the city. Marcus staring at his ceiling, rehearsing questions in his mind. Richard, surrounded by wealth but feeling poorer than ever, looking at old photos and wondering how to make things right. And Angela sitting in her friend's law office, pulling out old divorce papers, marriage certificates, and a yellowed envelope she'd never sent. One containing a letter she'd written to Richard when she first found out she was pregnant. Tomorrow would change everything. None of them were ready, but time wouldn't wait any longer. The daily grind was already busy when Richard arrived at 9:45 a.m. He chose a table in the back, away from the windows where passing business associates might spot him. For the first time in decades, Richard Halston didn't want to be seen. He ordered coffee but couldn't drink it. His stomach was in knots as he watched the door, waiting for the son he never knew he had. The son he'd abandoned before he even knew he existed. At exactly 10 a.m., Marcus walked in. He looked different in daylight, younger somehow in jeans and a simple blue shirt. But those green eyes, Richard's eyes, were hard as they scanned the coffee shop and found him. "You're early," Marcus said, sliding into the seat across from Richard. "Mom said you were always late for everything." Richard swallowed hard. "I've changed a lot since then." "Yeah, I can see that." Marcus gestured at Richard's expensive suit. The Richard Halston my mom knew couldn't afford dinner at fancy restaurants. Waitress approached their table and Marcus ordered black coffee. The interruption gave Richard a moment to gather his thoughts, but Marcus spoke first. "Why did you leave?" The question hung in the air between them. Richard had rehearsed his answer all night, but now the carefully prepared words felt hollow. "I was young," he started, "and stupid. Your mother and I were struggling to make ends meet. I had big dreams, but no way to achieve them. I convinced myself I was holding her back, that she deserved better than a husband who couldn't provide for her." "So you just walked away?" Marcus's voice was controlled, but his hands were clenched on the table. "Without even saying goodbye?" "I told her I needed time to figure things out, but once I left, I was a coward. The more time passed, the harder it became to go back." The waitress brought Marcus's coffee. He wrapped his hands around the cup, but didn't drink. "Did you ever think about her, about what happened to her?" Richard pulled out his phone and opened a news article from 15 years ago. He slid it across the table. The headline read, "Rising Star in Education, Angela Williams. Opens third youth center. I followed her career from afar," Richard admitted. "I saw how successful she became, how she helped so many kids. She did amazing things without me holding her back." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "You think that makes it okay? That because she succeeded, your abandonment was justified?" "No, of course not. Did you know she worked 2 jobs while getting her degree? That she used to skip meals so I could have new school supplies? That every Father's Day, she would take me to the park herself so I wouldn't feel left out when all the other kids were with their dads?" Each word hit Richard like a physical blow. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too crowded. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. If I had known about you..." "You would have what?" Marcus cut him off. "Stayed, sent money, been a father?" "Yes," Richard said firmly. "Yes to all of it. But you didn't even try to find out. You just vanished." Marcus pulled out his wallet and took out a creased photo. "See this? It's from my high school graduation. Mom took me to dinner. To Burger King afterward because that's what we could afford. That same week I saw you in the business section, celebrating the opening of your new hotel." Richard stared at the photo. Marcus in a graduation gown, Angela beaming beside him. They looked so happy despite everything he'd done. "I want to make it right," Richard said. I know I can't change the past, but please, let me try to be part of your life now. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I'm working on opening a youth center in the Bronx, following in Mum's footsteps. The building needs major renovations, but banks won't give me a loan. I can help with that. I don't want your money, Marcus interrupted. I want you to understand what you missed, what you threw away. He stood up, leaving his coffee untouched. I'm having dinner with Mom's family this Sunday. Her brothers, my cousins, the people who were there for us. Come meet them. See the family you could have had. Richard's throat tightened. They must hate me. They do, Marcus said bluntly. But Mom raised me to believe in second chances. This is yours, don't waste it. He put a card on the table with an address and time. And don't wear a suit. We're not that kind of family. As Marcus walked away, Richard picked up the card with trembling fingers. The address was in a modest neighborhood, the kind of place he used to live before he became Richard Holston, real estate mogul. His phone buzzed with a message from his office, urgent meeting with investors at 2 p.m. For the first time in his career, Richard typed back, reschedule it. Then he did something he hadn't done in decades. He drove to his old neighborhood, parked his luxury car on the street where he and Angela had once shared a tiny apartment, and walked. Each step brought back memories of the life he'd thrown away, the small dreams that now seemed bigger than any skyscraper he'd built. In his pocket, the dinner invitation felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Sunday would either be the beginning of something new or the final confirmation of everything he'd lost. Richard wasn't sure which possibility scared him more. Angela almost dropped the casserole dish when Marcus told her about inviting Richard to Sunday dinner. You did what? She asked, steadying herself against the kitchen counter. The smell of her famous mac and cheese filled the kitchen, the recipe her grandmother had taught her, the one that had made every family gathering special for the past 20 years. He needs to see what he missed, Mom, Marcus said, helping her with the dish. Uncle James and Uncle Mike need to see him too. Everything needs to come out in the open. Angela shook her head. Your uncles aren't going to like this. They were there when what? Angela turned back to the stove. When I found out I was pregnant with you. When I couldn't pay the rent. When I needed someone to drive me to the hospital when you were coming. They were there for everything. Across town, Richard stood in his walk-in closet, staring at rows of designer suits. Marcus had said not to wear a suit, but what else did he own? He finally found an old pair of jeans and a plain blue button-down shirt in the back. They felt foreign on his body, like a costume. His phone rang. It was his brother Thomas. Rick, where are you? The investors from Dubai are waiting. I'm not coming in today, Richard said, adjusting his shirt in the mirror. Family matter. Family? What family? You haven't had family since... Richard hung up. He didn't need to be reminded of what he'd thrown away. At Angela's house, cars started arriving. Uncle James came first, his wife Maria carrying her signature sweet potato pie. Then, Uncle Mike with his 3 teenage kids. Cousins, aunts, and family friends, the support system that had helped raise Marcus. Where's my favorite nephew? James called out, pulling Marcus into a bear hug. At 60, James was still strong as an ox. He'd taught Marcus how to play basketball, how to fix a car, how to be a man. Uncle James, Marcus said, hugging him back. There's something you should know. But before he could finish, the doorbell rang again. Through the front window, they could see a black Mercedes parked out front. The room went silent. Angela's hands tightened around the dish she was holding. James's face darkened. Is that who I think it is? Marcus moved toward the door. I invited him. The hell you did. James started forward, but Angela's voice cut through the tension. Let him in, Marcus. Richard stood on the porch holding a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. He'd almost brought flowers too, but remembered how Angela used to say she hated cut flowers. They reminded her of funerals. The door opened, and he found himself facing a room full of people who had stepped up when he had stepped out. Their stares felt like physical weight on his shoulders. James moved forward, his massive frame blocking Richard's view of the room. You've got some nerve showing up here. James, Angela said softly. Not now. No, he needs to hear this, James continued. Where were you when she was sleeping on our couch? When she was working double shifts while pregnant. When Marcus needed braces but insurance wouldn't cover it. Richard's grip tightened on the wine bottle. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Mike joined his brother. You walked out on her, changed your number, disappeared. Then we see you in the papers, getting richer while she's struggling to buy school supplies. Marcus stepped between them. I asked him to come. This is my choice. The room fell silent again. Angela moved to the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands. On her apron, she looked at Richard. Really looked at him, for the first time since the restaurant. Put the wine in the kitchen, she said quietly. Dinner's almost ready. The tension followed them to the dining room. Richard sat where Marcus pointed, acutely aware of the empty chair between him and Angela. Family photos covered the walls. Birthdays, graduations, holidays. He wasn't in any of them. James's wife, Maria, tried to break the ice. Marcus tells us you're in real estate. Yes, Richard said, his voice rough. I build things. Really? Mike's voice dripped with sarcasm. Because from what I remember, you're better at destroying things. Mike, Angela warned, not at the table. But Mike wasn't finished. No, he needs to hear this. You want to know what you missed, Richard? You missed Marcus's first steps. He took them right there in that living room. You missed his first word. It was mama because that's all he had. You missed his first basketball game where he scored the winning shot. James taught him that. By the way, each word was a knife to Richard's heart, but he forced himself to listen. He deserved this. You missed the hard times too, Mike continued. The nights Angela cried herself to sleep. The times Marcus asked why he didn't have a dad, like the other kids. The Christmas we all pitched in to buy him a bike because Angela couldn't afford it alone. Richard looked at his plate, the food untouched. I can't change the past. No, James agreed, you can't. But you can explain it. You owe them that much. Richard looked up, first at Marcus, then at Angela. The room went quiet, waiting. I was scared, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Scared of failing, of not being enough. We were so young, struggling so hard. I saw other men succeeding, building fortunes, and I convinced myself I could only do that alone. He pulled out his wallet and removed the old wedding photo. I told myself I was doing you a favor, Angela, that you deserved better than a husband who couldn't provide. But the truth is, I was a coward. Success meant nothing without his. Her voice broke. The room remained silent, but something had shifted. Perhaps it was the sight of Richard Halston, the great businessman, breaking down at a family dinner table. Or maybe it was the way Angela's hand moved slightly toward him before pulling back. Marcus reached over and took the wedding photo. Mom never kept any pictures of you, he said. I used to search the house when I was little, hoping to find one. I have more, Richard said quickly. Photos, letters, everything from back then. I kept it all. Why? Angela's question was soft but clear. Richard met her eyes. Because it was the only piece of real life I had left. The silence that followed was different from before, less hostile, more contemplative. Maria quietly started passing dishes, and slowly people began to eat. As the meal progressed, the stories continued, but they changed. Instead of accusations, they became memories shared. Marcus's first day of school, the time he tried to paint Angela's car as a Mother's Day surprise, the scholarship he won to college. Richard absorbed every word, every detail of the life he should have been part of, and as he listened, something became clear. These people hadn't just been Angela and Marcus's support system. They had been their family, the family he could have had. The morning after the family dinner, Richard sat in his office staring at the untouched stack of contracts on his desk. The city skyline outside his window, the empire he'd built, suddenly felt meaningless. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Halston, the board members are waiting in the conference room. Cancel it, he said. Cancel everything. Today. Instead of reviewing property deals, Richard opened his laptop and typed youth centers in the Bronx into the search bar. Marcus's youth center project, the one he'd mentioned at the coffee shop. He needed to understand it, not as a business venture, but as his son's dream. Across town, Angela was at her own youth center, trying to focus on paperwork, but finding her mind wandering back to last night, to Richard's confession, to the wedding photo he'd kept all these years. "Ms. Williams?" Her secretary poked her head in. "Your brother James is here." James walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee, their morning ritual for 20 years. "You okay?" he asked, setting her coffee down. That was quite a night. Angela managed a small smile. "I keep thinking about Marcus, the way he looked at those old photos Richard brought. He has a right to know his father," James said slowly, surprising her. "Even if his father is a no-good—" "James, sorry." He sat down heavily. "But you have to admit, the man's got nerve. Showing up with that expensive wine, that fancy car." "He's trying," Angela said softly, "for Marcus's sake. Question is, are you ready for what that means?" Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Meeting Dad for lunch. He wants to see the youth center site." Dad. The word hit her hard. Meanwhile, Marcus stood outside a rundown building in the Bronx. Graffiti covered the walls. Windows were boarded up, but he saw the potential. This could be a place where kids like him, kids without fathers, could find guidance and support. A black Mercedes pulled up, looking out of place in the neighborhood. Richard stepped out, dressed more casually today in slacks and a polo shirt. "This is it?" he asked, looking up at the building. "This is it," Marcus confirmed. "Needs work, but the bones are good. Like Mom's first center." Richard walked around, examining the structure with a developer's eye. The foundation's solid, electrical needs updating, HVAC systems shot. He turned to Marcus. "What's your vision for it?" "Basketball court out back, computer lab upstairs. Counseling rooms, tutoring spaces, a place where kids can feel safe, feel valued. Like Mom did for you," Richard said quietly. "Like Mom did for hundreds of kids." Marcus's voice hardened. "While you were building luxury condos," Richard flinched, but didn't argue. "The banks won't give you a loan? They say the neighborhood's too risky, the building needs too much work." Richard pulled out his phone, started typing notes. "I know people, contractors who owe me favors. We could—" "No." Marcus cut him off. "I told you I don't want your money. Then what do you want?" "I want you to understand." Marcus's voice echoed off the empty building. "Mom built her centers from nothing. No rich investors, no fancy connections. Just hard work and people who believed in her. That's the legacy I want to continue." Richard was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if I didn't use my connections? What if I just helped as your father?" The word hung between them. Marcus stared at the building, avoiding Richard's eyes. "There's a community meeting tonight," he finally said. "Local families, potential volunteers. Come, listen, learn why this matters." Back at her office, Angela was sorting through old files when she found something that made her heart stop. A yellowed envelope addressed to Richard, never sent. The letter she'd written when she found out she was pregnant. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Dear Richard, today I found out we're having a baby. Part of me wants to hate you for leaving, but a bigger part hopes that this news would bring you back. Our child deserves a father." The letter went on, full of hope and fear and love. She'd never mailed it, too proud to beg him to return. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Mom, Dad's coming to the community meeting tonight. I thought maybe you should come too." Angela looked at the old letter in her hands. "I'll be there." That evening, the community center's meeting room filled with local families. Richard arrived, early, sitting quietly in the back. He watched Marcus work the room, greeting everyone by name, asking about their kids, their jobs, their lives. Just like Angela would do. When Angela walked in, the room's energy shifted. Everyone knew her, respected her. She was their success story, the single mom who'd built something amazing. Richard shrunk in his seat, the weight of what he'd walked, away from pressing down on him. Marcus called the meeting to order. As he presented his plans for the youth center, Richard saw not just his son, but the man he could have helped raise. Every gesture, every passionate word about helping others, that was all Angela's influence. After the meeting, Richard approached them both. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said, Marcus, about doing things the right way." He took a deep breath. "I want to help, but not as Richard Holston, the developer. Just as your father. If you'll let me." Marcus looked at Angela, who nodded slightly. "The building needs a lot of work," Marcus said. "Physical work. You up for that?" Richard looked down at his soft hands, unused to manual labor. "I can learn Sunday mornings," Marcus said. "We're starting with cleanup, 8 a.m. sharp." He paused. "Uncle James and Uncle Mike will be there too." Richard nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. It wasn't just about fixing a building. It was about building something else, something he'd thrown away 23 years ago. As they left the meeting, Angela held back, watching father and son walk together, talking about plans for the building. The old letter seemed to burn in her purse. Some things were better left unsaid, she decided, at least for now. But as she watched Richard tentatively pat Marcus's shoulder, saw her son's slight lean into the touch, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for some kind of healing. Sunday morning came too early for Richard. He stared at himself in his bathroom mirror, dressed in brand new work clothes from the department store. The tags were still on. He'd never owned anything like this before. His phone buzzed with a message from his brother Thomas. "Emergency. Meeting with Chinese investors. Need you here ASAP." For the first time in his career, Richard typed back, "Handle it yourself, family commitment." He arrived at the youth center site at 7:45 a.m., his Mercedes looking even more out of place in the daylight. James and Mike were already there, unloading tools from their pickup trucks. Their stares made it clear they didn't expect him to show up. "Well, look who's here," Mike called out. "Better late than never, 23 years later." Marcus came out of the building carrying garbage bags. "He's on time, Uncle Mike." Richard moved to help with the bags, but James stopped him. "First things first, safety briefing." They gathered in what would become the main recreation room. Dust covered everything. Broken chairs and old furniture were piled in corners. The morning sun streamed through dirty windows, highlighting years of neglect. "Here's the deal," James said, handing out work gloves and face masks. "We start with cleanup. Every piece of junk, every bit of debris needs to go. Watch for nails, broken glass and rusty metal. This isn't your fancy office, Richard. One wrong move, you could get hurt." Richard nodded, pulling on the gloves. They felt stiff and foreign on his manicured hands. The work started immediately. James assigned teams. Marcus and Mike would tackle the upper floor, while Richard would work with James in the main room. Angela was coming later with lunch for everyone. Within an hour, Richard's new clothes were covered in dust and sweat. His hands, unused to physical labor, developed blisters. But he didn't complain. Every time he lifted a heavy piece of furniture or filled another garbage bag, he thought about all the times he hadn't been there for Marcus. "Taking a break already?" James asked, seeing Richard pause to catch his breath. "No." Richard straightened up, ignoring the pain in his back. "I'm good." James watched him struggle with a particularly heavy desk. "You're doing it wrong. Here." He demonstrated the proper lifting technique. "Use your legs, not your back." Marcus learned that his first day working with me at the moving company. He worked as a mover? Summer job through high school, helped pay for his school clothes. James gave Richard a hard look. "Some of us had to work with our hands to survive." Upstairs, Marcus and Mike could hear them talking. "Your dad's softer than a pillow," Mike said, tossing broken boards into a pile. "He won't last the day." Marcus looked down through a hole in the floor, watching Richard wipe sweat from his face and immediately get back to work. "Maybe," he said, "but he's here." Around noon, Angela arrived with several bags of food. The men gathered in what would become the cafeteria, sitting on upturned buckets and old crates. Richard's hands shook as he tried to open his sandwich. "Here." Angela handed him some bandages for his blisters. Their fingers brushed briefly, and both pulled back quickly. "Just like old times," Mike said, biting into his sandwich. "Remember when we fixed up Angela's first center? Worked every weekend for 6 months? Marcus was just a baby then," James added. "We set up a playpen in the corner while we worked." Richard listened quietly, Each story another reminder of what he'd missed. But something had changed. The hostility from James and Mike had softened slightly, replaced by something almost like pity as they watched him struggle with his bandaged hands. After lunch, Marcus pulled Richard aside. "You can go if you want. You've proved your point." Richard looked his son in the eye. "I'm not here to prove a point. I'm here because I want to be here, because I should have been here all along." The afternoon was harder than the morning. Every muscle in Richard's body screamed for rest. But he kept working, even after James and Mike left for the day. As the sun began to set, only he and Marcus remained, sorting through the last pile of debris. "Why did you really come today?" Marcus asked suddenly. Richard set down the board he was carrying. "Because this matters to you, and I'm trying to understand why. Mom always says a building is more than walls and windows. It's about the lives you change inside it." She's right. Richard looked around the dusty room. "I've built dozens of buildings, but I never thought about what happened inside them. Just the profit margins." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "There's more cleanup next Sunday." "I'll be here," Richard said without hesitation. As they locked up for the day, Richard's phone buzzed again. More messages from the office, deals requiring his attention. He ignored them all. Walking to his car, he caught his reflection in the window. His expensive clothes were ruined, his hands were bandaged, and his back would probably hurt for days. But for the first time in years, he felt like he'd built something real. At home that night, Angela looked through old photos, Marcus's first steps, first day of school, high school graduation. She found herself wondering what these moments would have been like if Richard had been there. Her phone lit up with a text from Marcus. "Dad stayed all day, actually worked hard." Dad. There was that word again. But this time it didn't hurt quite as much to read it. In his penthouse, Richard soaked his aching muscles in a hot bath, looking at his blistered hands. On his phone was a photo Marcus had taken of the day's progress, father and son standing in front of a pile of cleaned-up debris. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He saved the photo, then did something he hadn't done in decades. He cleared his entire schedule for next Sunday. Some things, he was finally learning, were worth more than money. Richard sat in his office Monday morning, staring at the proposals for his newest luxury development project. The numbers were impressive. Millions in potential profit. But all he could think about was the youth center's broken windows and leaking roof. "Mr. Holston?" His assistant Sarah stood in the doorway. "The board is asking about the Chinese investors. Your brother Thomas says you've been unavailable." Richard looked up from the papers. "Sarah, how long? Have you worked for me?" 12 years, sir. "And in all that time, have I ever asked about your family?" Sarah hesitated. "No, sir." "Do you have children?" 2 boys, 10 and 8. Richard nodded slowly. "Take the rest of the day off. Go be with them." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't move. "Sir, about the board meeting, tell them I'm restructuring my priorities." Across town, Angela sat in her office at the youth center, trying to focus on grant applications. But her mind kept drifting to yesterday, to Richard's bandaged hands, to the way Marcus had started calling him Dad. Lisa, her best friend and lawyer, walked in without knocking. "Spill it. You've been avoiding my calls since the family dinner." Angela sighed. "There's nothing to spill." "Really?" Lisa sat down, crossing her arms. "Your ex-husband shows up after 23 years, starts bonding with Marcus, and you have nothing to say?" Before Angela could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dad's coming to my presentation at the community board meeting tonight. Is that okay?" Angela showed the message to Lisa, who whistled low. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know." Angela stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the playground she'd built for her kids. Not just Marcus, but all the children who'd found a home at her centers. For 23 years, it was just us, me and Marcus, building our life. Now Richard's here, trying to be the father he never was, and Marcus he's letting him in. Are you afraid of losing him? No, maybe. I don't know. Angela turned back to her friend. "You should see them together, Lisa. They have the same gestures, the same laugh. Sometimes I look at them and see the family we could have been. The family you still could be. Don't. Angela's voice was sharp. Richard made his choice. People change, Lisa said gently. You of all people should believe in second chances. Isn't that what your centers are all about? At his office, Richard was making calls, not to investors or contractors, but to the people Marcus needed to approve his youth center project. Not pulling strings, just asking questions, understanding the process. His brother Thomas burst in, waving a document. What is this? You're pulling out of the Shanghai deal? It's not the right time, Richard said calmly. Not the right time? It's a billion-dollar development. There are more important things than money, Thomas. Thomas stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Who are you? And what have you done with my brother? Richard picked up a framed magazine cover from his wall, himself standing in front of his tallest building. The headline reading, Real Estate's Rising Star. Did you know Marcus won a scholarship to college? He asked quietly. Full ride. Academic excellence and community service. He's brilliant, Thomas. And I missed it all. That evening, the community board meeting room was packed. Marcus stood at the podium, presenting his plans for the youth center. Richard sat in the back next to Angela, both of them watching their son with pride. The building needs extensive renovation, Marcus was saying, but the foundation is solid, just like this community. One board member leaned forward. And how do you plan to fund these renovations? Through grants, community fundraising, and, Marcus paused, glancing at Richard, sweat equity. We've already begun the cleanup work with community volunteers. I see Richard Halston is here, another board member noted. Is Halston Developments involved in this project? The room turned to look at Richard. He stood up slowly. I'm not here as a developer, he said clearly. I'm here as Marcus's father, supporting his vision. This isn't about property values or profit margins. It's about giving back to a community that raised my son when I didn't. Angela's breath caught at his words. She watched as Marcus's face lit up with surprise and pride. After the meeting, the three of them stood in the parking lot. The evening was warm, reminiscent of summer nights long ago when Richard and Angela were young and in love. That was quite a speech, Angela said softly. Richard looked at her, then at Marcus. I meant every word. Marcus checked his phone. Uncle James wants to know if you're still coming Sunday. Says he found some more blisters for you to work on. Richard laughed, then winced, touching his still sore back. I'll be there. As Marcus walked to his car, Angela turned to Richard. You're really serious about this, aren't you? I can't change the past, Angela, but I can try to be the father he deserves now. He paused. The father I should have been all along. Angela watched him for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive. What's this? Videos, she said quietly. Marcus's first steps, his first word. School plays, basketball games. I recorded everything. Richard stared at the drive like it was made of gold. Take it home, Angela said. See what you missed. Then decide if you're really ready for what being a father means. As she walked away, Richard held the USB drive tightly. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with more messages about deals and meetings. He ignored them all. That night, in his elegant penthouse, Richard Halston sat alone in the dark, watching his son grow up through a screen, tears rolling down his face as 23 years of missed moments played out before him. And in her modest home, Angela pulled out the never-sent letter again, reading her own words from so long ago. Our child deserves a father. Maybe, she thought, it wasn't too late for that to be true. Richard hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night watching the videos Angela had given him, unable to stop even as the sun began to rise. His son's life played out before him. Birthdays, holidays, school events, each moment a reminder of his absence. 3-year-old Marcus taking his first wobbly steps toward the camera, Angela's voice encouraging him. Come on, baby, you can do it. 7-year-old Marcus in a school play, dressed as George Washington, forgetting his lines until Angela's gentle whisper from offstage helped him remember. 12-year-old Marcus scoring his first basket, the crowd cheering, James lifting him onto his shoulders, while Mike captured it all on video. 16-year-old Marcus receiving his scholarship award, his speech thanking his mother for never giving up on him. The last video was Marcus's high school graduation. As he watched his son accept his diploma, Richard noticed something he'd missed in all the other videos. In every significant moment, Marcus's eyes would scan the crowd, just for a second, as if looking for someone who wasn't there. The sound of his phone ringing jolted him back to the present. It was Thomas. "The board is calling an emergency meeting," his brother said. "They're concerned about your recent behavior, the Shanghai deal, the missed meetings. I'm making some changes," Richard said, his voice hoarse from crying. "Changes? Rick, you're acting crazy. This sudden obsession with your son." "He's not an obsession, Thomas. He's my child. My child who had to have his uncles teach him how to shave because I wasn't there." At her youth center, Angela was sorting through old photos for a fundraising presentation when Marcus stopped by. "Mum, you okay? You look tired," Angela managed, a smile. "Just thinking. I gave your father those videos last night." Marcus sat down heavily. "All of them?" "All of them." She reached for his hand. "I know you're trying to build a relationship with him. I wanted him to understand what that means. Are you worried?" Marcus asked softly. "About him being in our lives?" Before Angela could answer, her secretary came in. "Ms. Williams, there's someone here to see you." Richard stood in the doorway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by a man who seemed to have aged overnight. "I'll give you 2 minutes," Marcus said, standing up. He paused by Richard. "We still on for Sunday?" Richard pulled his son into a sudden hug, holding him tight. Marcus, surprised, slowly hugged him back. After Marcus left, Richard sat down across from Angela, placing the USB drive on her desk. "I watched them all," he said, his voice rough. "Every minute, every moment I threw away." "That wasn't the point." Angela started, but Richard cut her off. "Yes, it was. You wanted me to see exactly what I'd done. Not just to you, but to him." He leaned forward. "That scholarship ceremony, you were working 2 jobs then, weren't you? I saw the exhaustion in your eyes when you hugged him." Angela looked away. "We managed. But you shouldn't have had to just manage." Richard stood up, pacing. "I saw how many times James and Mike were there, school, events, sports games, fixing things around the house. They were the fathers he needed because I was too much of a coward to stay. Richard, there was one video," he continued. "Marcus must have been about 6. He was asking you why other kids had daddies and he didn't." Angela remembered that day. She'd turned off the camera right after, cried herself to sleep that night. "You told him his daddy had to go away to build big buildings," Richard said. "You didn't tell him I abandoned you. You protected me, even then." "I protected him," Angela corrected. "He needed to believe his father had a reason for leaving, something better than the truth." Richard sat back down, looking defeated. "I built an empire of empty buildings while you built something real, a family, a community, a man I'm proud to call my son, even though I had nothing to do with the person he became." He pulled out his phone, opened his calendar. "Every Sunday is blocked off now, permanently, for the youth center." He looked up at her. "But that's not enough, is it?" "What do you mean?" "I've been trying to make up for lost time by showing up now, but watching those videos..." He stopped, fighting for control. 23 years of memories, of moments I can never get back. How do you make up for that?" Angela was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened her drawer and pulled out the yellowed envelope, the letter she'd never sent. "I wrote this the day I found out I was pregnant," she said, sliding it across the desk. "I was going to mail it, but..." Richard opened the letter with trembling hands, reading Angela's words from 23 years ago. Her hopes, her fears, her love for their unborn child. "You kept it," he whispered. "I kept everything," Angela admitted. "Even though I told myself I'd moved on." Richard carefully folded the letter. "I don't deserve forgiveness from either of you." "Maybe not," Angela said softly, "but Marcus is choosing to give you a chance anyway. He gets that from me, you know." "Believing people can change." Richard stood up slowly. "I should go. I have a board meeting about the Shanghai deal." He shook his head. "About restructuring the company. I'm stepping down as CEO." Angela's eyes widened. What? I'm keeping my ownership stake, but Thomas can run the daily operations. I need to focus on more important things. As he turned to leave, Angela called out, "Richard, that video you mentioned, when Marcus was 6. She paused. I didn't just protect you, I protected myself too. Because admitting you chose buildings over us, it hurt too much. Richard nodded, understanding in his eyes. I didn't choose buildings, Angela. I chose fear. Fear of failing you both. And in doing that, I failed you worse than I ever could have otherwise. He left her office, walking past the walls covered with photos of children whose lives she'd changed. In every smile, every proud moment captured, he saw what real success looked like. In his car, he pulled out his phone one more time. But instead of calling Thomas or the board, he opened the calendar app and added another permanent appointment. Every Thursday, lunch with his son. The news of Richard Halston stepping down as CEO spread through New York's business world like wildfire. His brother Thomas paced the executive conference room, watching business news channels blast headlines about Halston developments. He's lost his mind, Thomas told the board members, all because of some kid he abandoned 20 years ago. But Richard wasn't watching the news. He was at the youth center site wearing his now worn work clothes, helping James install new windows. His hands had finally developed calluses, and his expensive watch was tucked safely away in his car. You're all over the business channels, James said, holding the window frame steady. They're saying you're having a breakdown. Richard adjusted his grip on the drill. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking clearly. Inside the building, Marcus was giving a tour to potential donors. His voice carried through the empty rooms full of passion and purpose. This room will be our computer lab. Over here, the counseling center. Every kid who walks through these doors will know they matter. One of the donors, a well-dressed woman, touched Marcus's arm. We heard your father is Richard Halston. Is he really involved in this project? Before Marcus could answer, Richard walked in, covered in dust and sweat. I'm just the handyman, he said with a smile. This is Marcus's vision. I'm here to support it, nothing more. The donors whispered among themselves, but Marcus beamed at his father's words. Later that afternoon, Angela arrived with lunch for the workers. She found Richard and James sitting on upturned buckets, actually talking instead of trading barbed comments. The business news says you're throwing away your legacy, she said, handing Richard a sandwich. No, he replied, looking around the half-renovated building. I'm finally building one worth having. That evening, Marcus asked both his parents to stay after the others left. He had news to share. The city approved our permits, he announced. And after today's donor tour, we're fully funded for the first phase of renovation. That's wonderful. Angela hugged him tight. There's more, Marcus continued. They want to name the building the Williams Youth Center after you, Mom. After everything you've built. Angela's eyes filled with tears. Richard watched them embrace, feeling both pride and regret pierce his heart. It's perfect, he said softly. Your mother's legacy, Marcus turned to him. Actually, I was thinking, what if we called it the Williams Halston Center? The room went silent. Angela's breath caught. Marcus? No, Richard started. I haven't earned that. You're earning it now, Marcus said. Every Sunday, every blister, every moment you choose to be here instead of in your office. He looked between his parents. This place is about second chances, right? About family? Angela watched Richard's face crumple with emotion. Marcus is right, she said, surprising herself. You're not the same man who left us. I don't deserve this, Richard whispered. Maybe not, Angela agreed. But that's what grace is about. Getting what you don't deserve and using it to become better. Later that night, after Marcus left, Richard and Angela sat on the building's front steps. The street was quiet. The evening, hair warm with late summer. Remember our first apartment? Angela asked suddenly. 3 blocks from here. Richard nodded. Above the Chinese restaurant, the whole place smelled like dumplings. You used to bring me takeout when I was studying. For finals. You were so determined to finish your degree. Richard looked at her. You still had that determination when you built your first youth center. I saw it in the videos. Angela was quiet for a moment. I used to imagine you'd see me in the news, read about the centers, and reach out. But you never did. I was ashamed, Richard admitted. Each time I read about your success, it reminded me of my biggest failure. Not the marriage ending, but the way I left. The coward I was. And now? Now? Richard gestured at the building behind them. Now I'm trying to be the man I should have been back then. The man our son believes I can be. Angela stood up, brushing dust from her clothes. Marcus wants us all to have dinner tomorrow night. Just the three of us. Like a family. Like people. Trying to figure out what family means. She paused at her car. Don't be late. As she drove away, Richard sat there a while longer, looking at the building that represented so much more than bricks and mortar. His phone buzzed. Thomas again. Probably with more news about the company's stock price falling. He declined the call and instead opened the photos on his phone. The latest ones showed progress on the youth center, Marcus laughing with James, Angela bringing lunch. Simple moments, everyday moments, the kind he'd missed for 23 years. But there would be new moments now, different ones. If he was. Lucky, better ones. Richard stood up, looking at the name painted on the construction sign, the Williams Holston Youth Center, building tomorrow together, tomorrow. It was a good place to start. 6 months had passed since that first chance encounter at La Maison restaurant. The Williams Holston Youth Center was ready for its grand opening, transformed from an abandoned building into a beacon of hope for the community. Richard stood in front of his closet, this time ignoring his expensive suits in favor of the kind of clothes he now wore every Sunday. His phone had finally stopped ringing with calls from business reporters asking about his breakdown. Even Thomas had stopped trying to convince him to return as CEO. The center's opening ceremony was in 2 hours, but first there was somewhere else he needed to be. Across town, Angela was in her office at her original youth center, holding the never-sent letter she'd written 23 years ago. A knock at her door made her look up. Ready? Marcus asked, poking his head in. Angela smiled at her son, their son. Just getting sentimental. They drove together to a small Chinese restaurant 3 blocks from the new center. Richard was already there, sitting at a table, near the window. The same table where he and Angela used to share meals when they were young and in love. You remembered, Angela said softly as they sat down. Table 7, Richard nodded. Best view of the street. The owner, Mr. Chen, was considerably older now, but his eyes lit up with recognition. Miss Angela, and this must be little Marcus all grown up. You know me? Marcus asked, surprised. Mr. Chen laughed. You were here before you were born. Your mother, she came every day when she was expecting. Your father would bring her. He stopped, noticing Richard. The room grew quiet. Richard Holston, Mr. Chen said slowly. After all these years, Richard stood up, extending his hand. It's good to see you, Mr. Chen. The old man ignored the hand and instead pulled Richard into a hug. Welcome home, boy. Welcome home. Over lunch, they talked about the past 6 months. The Sunday work sessions that had become sacred time, the Thursday lunches where Marcus and Richard were slowly building a relationship, the way James and Mike had gradually accepted Richard's presence, even if they still gave him the hardest jobs at the site. The reporters keep asking why I stepped down, Richard said, picking up a dumpling with newly practiced chopstick skills. They don't understand that I'm not stepping down, I'm stepping up finally. To being a father? Marcus asked. To being the man I should have been all along. Richard looked at Angela. The man you believed I could be once upon a time. Angela's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her tea. We were so young. Too young to understand what mattered, Richard agreed. I thought success meant building the tallest towers, making the most money. But our son, his voice caught. Our son showed me what real success looks like. Marcus looked between his parents, seeing not just who they were now, but who they had been. Young in love, sitting at this same table, dreaming of a future together. Mom, he said carefully. Show him the letter. Angela's eyes widened. Marcus, please. With shaking hands, Angela pulled out the yellowed envelope. "I wrote this the day I found out about you," she told Marcus. "I was going to send it to your father, but I didn't deserve it," Richard finished. "No," Angela corrected, "because I was afraid. Afraid he wouldn't come back, even for you. Afraid of hoping." She slid the letter across the table. Richard had read it before that day in her office, but now he read it again. The words of a young woman full of love and fear and hope, believing in a future that never came. "I keep thinking," Richard said quietly, "about all the mornings I could have made you dumplings, all the nights I could have read him stories, all the moments—" "Stop," Marcus cut in. "We can't change the past, but this center we're building, it's about the future, about giving kids like me, kids with missing pieces, a place to belong." Angela reached for her son's hand, then hesitantly extended her other hand to Richard. After a moment's surprise, he took it. "The center opens in an hour," she said. "Are you both ready?" The grand opening was packed. Community members, donors, kids from the neighborhood, all gathered to see the miracle that had risen from the abandoned building. James and Mike stood proudly near the front as Marcus took the podium. Richard and Angela sat in the front row, not quite together but no longer quite apart. "The Williams Holston Youth Center," Marcus began, "is more than just a building. It's a story of second chances, of healing, of family." He looked at his parents. "My mother taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about showing up day after day even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." In the crowd, Richard saw Thomas standing in the back, watching with newfound understanding. "And my father," Marcus continued, making Richard's heart stop, "taught me that it's never too late to choose differently, to build something new on an old foundation." After the ceremony, as the crowd enjoyed refreshments, Richard found Angela standing in what would be the counseling room. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For giving me a chance to know our son, for keeping that letter, for believing in second chances." Angela turned to him, her eyes soft with memories. "Do you remember what you said to me that last morning before you left?" Richard nodded painfully. "I need to build something bigger than this. And did you find something bigger?" Richard looked out the window where Marcus was showing a group of neighborhood kids the new basketball court. "Yes," he said quietly, "but not in the way I thought." Angela touched his arm gently. "We can't go back, Richard." "I know. But maybe we can go forward, all of us?" Before she could answer, Marcus called them both outside. The photographer was ready for the official photo. As they stood together, mother, father, son, in front of the building that had brought them full circle, the photographer counted down. "One big smile, 1 and 2. In that moment, just before the flash, Angela felt Richard's hand brush against hers. And for the first time in 23 years, she didn't pull away. The future wasn't written yet. But maybe, just maybe, the next chapter would be better than the last. 3. The camera flashed, capturing not what was lost, but what was found. Not an ending, but a new beginning. And above them, the sign gleamed in the sunlight. The Williams Holston Youth Center. Building. Tomorrow together, tomorrow had finally come.